My name is Aaron Burgess. So I am currently with state government for the last 4 months. Never worked in government before. I am with the Family and Social Services Administration Data Analytics Data Services team. Because it's government, they love their names, FSSA, DNA, DST. Why FSSA should be very important to you is because it comes out of every single one of your paychecks. FSSA is Medicaid, FSSA is SNAP, aka food stamps, and FSSA is TANF, aka welfare. We actually have the largest budget of all state agencies because we receive about somewhere between 75 to 90% of our funding, depending on what you're talking about, from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services out of DC. And 90% of my salary is paid for by the federal government, so that's important to me. When I initially submitted this talk, I had only been on the job for maybe a hectic month and a half, and the goal of this talk is still somewhat the same, but I need to preface it a little because has anybody in the room ever worked for state government? Ooh, this will be fun. So I hadn't, and one night, my last job, I was the team lead for location intelligence engineering at Pitney Bowes, and I was getting a little fed up. And I used to do graduate research with Children's Health Services research at the IU School of Medicine. And a chipper, cheery pediatrician who was the head of IU of ER pediatrics at Riley, I helped her, and we published a few papers together. And apparently one night she got wind that I was looking for a new opportunity, and I received this picture, which is about 2 or 3 bottles of wine deep at Bluebeard. I'm sure you all know the governor's cabinet. This is your FSSA secretary, Jen Walthall. I just received an anonymous text, anonymous in the sense that I knew who it was, and she said, "Come work for me." And I responded in the morning, and I said, "I don't know what that means." So I did what a lot of people would do, especially somebody that they were close to, and you had an offer for state government. I said, no, I'm not going to come work for you at all. Why would I? My inclination in state government is that I'm going to go back to 1998 in terms of technology. It's going to be bureaucratic, and why should I waste my time doing it? So I did. I said no. And she then ran a full court press and started sending people to come talk to me. I was working out of the bureau, co-working space. Random people from FSSA in the state would show up to try to encourage me. And so finally, whether she exhausted me or pressured me, I said okay. So I was brought on along with another social science researcher, a professor from Fairbanks, to kind of take a 2-track approach to this. Which was we encountered a division called Data Analytics. Plenty of data, not a damn bit of analytics. Pretty bad at it. So one gentleman, he kind of takes the subject matter expertise role. I kind of guide technology and architecture, at least within our group. And why this talk has expanded to a little bit of a preface is this. The first thing that happened on day one, one, I was given no computer on day one because why would it be prepared? I was handed about a 12-pound nasty-ass nice PC here 5 days later. And when I had asked for R in Python, the response from the IoT tech, and yes, I did say IoT, that is their name, Indiana Office of Technology. In fairness, it predates the IoT concept. When I asked what I wanted on my machine, and I said, well, I can handle it, and they said, no, you can't, because nobody installs stuff on their machine by themselves. I said, okay, R in Python, and I shit you not, the response I got was, what is R in Python? So initially, I went, okay, I did make a mistake. But one of the better parts, and why this has turned into more of a story, is because this is kind of the story of what would happen if you get in a situation where, I call it the Kaggle problem, right? The Kaggle problem is this. Lots of people learn how to do machine learning on Kaggle. Well, you're given data sets that often are clean for you, and you already actually have a solution somewhere in it. And we get that a lot in employment, right? You come out, you get hired by maybe a tech firm that already has set standards, they're already running. Well, I just jumped into a shit show and decided, well, let's see what we can do here. So just to kind of let you know, so more than anything, Medicaid data probably represents 90% of my work. It's 90% of the value, and it's 90% of what comes out of your paycheck. So with that said, the first thing I kind of ran into was outdated architecture and infrastructure, lots of tribal knowledge. Nobody wrote anything down. One guy left, and it turned out he had been running critical reports on his local machine for 5 years. No version control, nobody knew anything about him. He left, so everything had to be reproduced, and nobody could reproduce it in the same way that he did. So that gets me to kind of the start of this talk, and to that I should say, trust had been completely lost with our group, because how can you trust a group that just pulls data out for you and doesn't really give you anything? They get 2 weeks to do any SQL pull, and come on. So we're doing some changes. But so the start of the talk, I bring up the Excel dilemma. So what do I mean by the Excel dilemma? I don't hate Excel. I don't have a problem with Excel. Excel's fine. My problem with Excel is the example I'm going to show you. This is an example of the typical report, and I emphasize report because every time I hear report, my first question is, okay, we produce all these reports. Who looks at them? We don't know. How do you track who looks at them? We don't. Okay. How do you know anybody looks at them? We don't. So this was the first example I was given. So we got a multi-tab. I have redacted some things. I am working with PHI, PII, so you can't see everything. So this was going to be sent to both the secretary, Jen Weltall, her kind of underlings, and I never believed there were stupid questions until I met this group, and that's called the state legislature. So what happens is, I haven't redacted what this is about. If you got this, what is this? This is the cover page. Proc codes and diagnosis codes for tobacco use are listed in the table. Okay? Something to do with tobacco. If you're not familiar with claims data and stuff like that, claims data tend to use procedure codes. That's surgical procedure codes. It represents what was done. It was originally meant to mean surgical procedure codes. Now it means just about anything. ICD codes, we're now on ICD-10. The rest of the world uses those for public health because it's the United States. When they were implemented here, what are they used for? Billing. And what's the goal? As many codes as you can get on a bill, because that's how your doctor makes their money. But at the end of the day, I don't know what this is. I looked at this and I went, okay, here's a total expenditure report. So this is raw summary. So this is summary spent by months based on the population, tobacco users, non-tobacco users. Okay, so what are they supposed to garner from this? And the problem is when you leave people with no direct statement of fact that you're trying to communicate to them, you just left it up to the state legislature to determine what this means. And you know what that means? It means my life's going to be hell because I'm going to get the dumbest questions in the world. So I don't really want those. In this case, I mean, there's a lot that could have been done better. You know, and in fairness to the individual that pulled it off, I'm not attacking this individual. They are doing exactly what had been done for years, and that's fine. The goal was not to come in and throw everybody under the bus. The goal was to come in and try to introduce to a group of individuals who have not been used to working in more of a technical operations workflow. How do you implement that, and how do you implement it quickly, especially across a broad group of people? Some who just happen to know SQL, but if you bring up a new technology, they're going to run and hide under the table. Some who kind of want to be more aggressive and go off on their own. So that's where we kind of started. My other issue I'll also bring up with Excel is this. With Excel, the moment you pass that Excel workbook to somebody else, I can't help but believe there are now 2 different copies of that data, because that person's going to take, you don't know, and by the time it gets to the 17th person, there could be 17 copies of it, and it's a terrible situation to be in, because what's true at that point? And it gets back to the trust issues. The next topic shouldn't really be surprising. I kind of expected most people would be like, hey, he's talking about operations and he mentioned version control. Yeah, that's kind of a no-brainer. Well, it wasn't where I was. So how do you introduce this, and how do you introduce it quickly? So quickly, we had Bitbucket licenses, and we had Enterprise Bitbucket. So I said, okay, I'd prefer GitHub, but you know, it didn't really matter. I went ahead and had everybody download GitHub's little GUI for Windows, which you can use with Bitbucket. Of course, it tries to get you to enter your GitHub account at first, but you can shim it. It's not a big deal. So first and foremost, it was teaching everybody how to do GitHub Flow, which was a very frustrating week. It wasn't frustrating in the sense that they got it philosophically, but you ran into three things. One was individuals who, it's a new concept, and so there was some struggle, and I'm very sympathetic to that. You had others who were the lifers who, like hell, somebody's going to come in and tell us to do something different, everything's fine. And then you had the third party, which was the people that might not have had their eyes closed, but were probably asleep in some way. So we try to introduce it as best we can at first, and the thing I typically go in with these situations, because I've had to overhaul teams before, is I'm not looking for everybody to buy in. I'm looking for at least maybe a few core team members, the people who, even the ones on the team that don't want to listen to me, they're going to listen to those people. Get them to buy in. So the lead data analyst jumped on it right away, and I went, boom, okay, there's my hook. If I get him in, the others kind of go as he does. So that began to work pretty efficiently. I put up the link to GitHub Flow. If you're not familiar, Git Flow versus GitHub Flow. GitHub Flow, there's no develop branch. I mean, it's just for every new feature, you make a branch, have your pull request, and pull it into master. It's simple. It works very much because probably 70% of what we do are ad hoc requests. So yeah, I want a repo, and some people would ask, well, why set up a repository if we're never going to do it again? And it's because you assume you're never going to do it again. I need tracking. I want to see all the comments in there as far as how the pull request went, because it also stands to take away tribal knowledge. So the next time somebody has to do something and says, I've never worked with this population before, well, go check out the pull request for that particular branch that answered that question. Most of the notes should be in there. General rule we have is that whoever's the reviewer, you don't merge to master unless you're prepared to say, I am a secondary code owner. And it means that if something happens to the author, I can come to you and ask you everything about it. And if you don't understand it, don't merge it. And if you don't feel comfortable and you feel like you need a second person, then bring a second person in. The other unique thing we brought in that I think I randomly happened to start looking into like 5 days before I started, but we started working with DVC. DVC is kind of obscure, a new kid on the block. What DVC is it data version control in the sense that you're actually pushing data up to a repository? No, you're pushing references to the location of that data. So I have been migrating a lot of our workflow into various data lakes, which are housed in S3. And so what DVC allows for us to do is we are using Jupyter Lab, and I'm getting ready to have Jupyter Hub released in a more succinct format so that we can actually have more login roles. But the idea here is this: if I have data version control and I have references to where the data exists, I can pass it on to the next person without hard-coded references into a data set that maybe I pulled down locally, or even if I had the S3 reference. It's more important in the sense that you can actually help create command line runnable notebooks. So it's been a welcome addition. It is actually kind of nice. One of the you can add things. I mean, you can point to SFTP. You could point to local. We have a very painful thing in the FSSA called the protected data zone. That all of the Medicaid data is behind a giant firewall, and a Citrix receiver gives you access to Teradata SQL Assistant. Everything's housed in Teradata and some other things. It was designed to try to keep PII, PHI off people's local. Problem is, if you want to use R in Python, you can't. So guess what that had the effect of doing? Everybody pulls PII and PHI down to their local machines. So the thing that was supposed to make everything more secure really made everything worse. This is a way of getting around it, especially one of the next steps we're working on is we're going to have a dedicated VPN established between our AWS VPC and our network. So next I had to kind of get into repository setup, specifically for ad hoc. So I'm not talking about traditional software setup. So the agreed upon was, so the data folder, I just mentioned, we're not going to put PII, PHI into a Git repository. If you had reference data that's public, that's fine. Go ahead and keep it in there. Small stuff. I'd rather people, again, use DBC if they had other elements. The deliverables and the develop and then source. Source is just, hey, did you have a series of more complex functions that probably deserve to have unit tests and whatnot? Go ahead and put them in there. Develop, that's going to be all your notebooks. Deliverables, so we'll show exactly what we're getting into in terms of deliverables. Ultimately, what the deliverables are is we convert our Jupyter Notebooks into HTML pages, collapse the code, and pass that off as the replacement for Excel. But we'll get there, show you what it looks like. Otherwise, just simple, just git ignore, have your requirements file just so somebody could create a virtual environment based off however you did it. And the README as just a definition. The README, I want people to give me a walkthrough of the requests, what was your methodology and steps. You'll see, we'll bring up the output. More than just like what you're telling the stakeholder, I want you to explain to me what steps you took to get here. It's great if they're in your notebook, but you know, putting certain comments in your notebook is like comments in code. It's far more often that the person updates the code and not the comments, so they go a little stale. I put in notes for myself, so I remember what I'm doing. So this is a good example. So this is a harmless one that I could show everybody. Let's get that off the page. I'll increase the size here. I even hummed to myself in front of large groups of people. It's no big deal. I don't expect you to know what this means. So this is a non-emergency medical transportation member profile, 2017-12 through 2018-05. Non-emergency medical transportation, what that is that was a service that existed before, but as part of the Medicaid expansion. If you need dialysis, you're unable to drive yourself as part of Medicaid benefits, you are allotted non-emergency medical transportation. It has been the bane of my existence for about the last month, thanks to both the observation of anecdotal outliers by the legislature because of Rafael Sanchez. But besides that, so this is generally the template that we go for now. First and foremost, objective. So what is this answering? I don't care who asked it. I want to know that if I gave this to anybody in FSSA, this tells them exactly what it is that this is supposed to do. What is this telling me? So in this case, this was just exploratory. Examine NEMT members and trips that correspond with HIP medically frail conditions over the range of 2017-12 through 2018-05. This will be understood internally, medically frail conditions, congestive heart failure, end-stage renal disease. Generally, if you're under medically frail, you're not in good shape. And most likely need more care. It tends to be too, people that are medically frail probably represent 95% of the costs in Medicaid. Next, we state the methodology. Why do we state the methodology? Does a stakeholder really care the code we wrote? No, they don't. The methodology here is called legislative defense. It's if somebody asks, how did you get these numbers? How did you come to them? We're storytelling, and we're dumbing it down. We're creating layman's terms so that people can understand. We need the elevator speech, that somebody can be in the elevator with legislator X, and you say to legislator X, hey, you wanted to know about this, here's what we can say about it, and if they try to poke holes, you can refer back to your methodology, and if they ask questions that you can't answer, don't answer them. Only go within the scope of what was delivered. That way we can have basically bidirectional trust between each other. Results, a little more comprehensive, but more than anything, and this has probably been the most popular item, was just realizing sometimes all the stakeholder wants at the end of the day is a sentence, maybe 2 sentences. People love visualizations, they're great, but sometimes I get afraid we do visualizations for each other, technical people, and too often than not, they don't possess a lot of meaning for the people that are making business decisions, the people that have the money. And the problem too is at the end of the day, if you deliver a lot of pretty graphs, but nobody actually thinks they're earning anything off of them or changing financials, they don't tend to care. So initially it's all text, and I think that surprised people at first. And one of the reasons is essentially though, like I just said, I haven't collapsed any of the code in here, and for the bokeh presentation, which is, you said bouquet, which I have to admit, I don't know, is it bokeh or bouquet? Because I've been saying bokeh for like 2 years. Bouquet. Okay. But anyway, so yeah, we use the band formerly known as bokeh, now bouquet. We do use it a lot, so it's helpful. It's helpful too because even though you create these nice interactive visualizations, guess what they always want to do? Hey, can I print this? Why do we even make an interactive visualization? But that's fine. You know, I mean, that's why we embed, as was demonstrated earlier, the ability to save it out to a PNG, and you can put it into your PowerPoint, and everybody will live. But so at the end of the day, this is essentially kind of the conversion, and this is more or less, like I said, for ad hocs. I'm talking about something else if we're talking about the implementation of some of the models that we have upcoming. But staying on ad hoc, and I'll talk a little more about some of our larger scale work. I still want continuous integration, continuous delivery done for ad hocs. And the reason for that is my experience tells me that a good deal of those ad hocs won't actually be ad hocs. They're going to have to be done again. So with continuous integration, continuous delivery, what do I mean here? I mean, normally this means you're building your software like every night, right, and determining whether everything passed, if the build did fine. When it comes to data products and reports, I am doing it because our Medicaid data is constantly updating. I want to know, I don't want to hear that, oh, hey, we got to run this report on the 15th, we ran it. Oh, by the way, nobody QA/QC'd it, and we passed it out, and it ended up it was wrong. No, I want it running every night because I want to know if it fails. And we set up QA/QC tests on these every night, regardless of whether we're ever going to run them again. They're low cost. There's not a lot going on. We are using Bamboo for CI/CD right now. But this is a response to the fact that in the past, what I saw was a group that was dealing more with fires. It was always it was always retrospective, right? It wasn't proactive. And that's the goal, is to change this, is to be able to go to stakeholders before they even know a problem and tell them, hey, you're going to have a problem on your hands, and we're going to be the first to tell you. Again, a lot of this is about building trust again. Decision fodder, be perfectly honest with you, it just was me showing this graph again. I got lazy and I had so many things to do that I wanted an extra bubble. And that's me telling my audience that I'm just completely lying to them. There's nothing special here outside of what you already saw. But what's a little bit interesting to talk about next, if I can get back to it, is kind of where we're going with our future. Well, and I have to bring this one up. So there's a phrase that I encountered when I started. It's the king of oxymorons I've encountered in a long time. Recurring ad hoc. And somebody told me that, and I went, that's not possible. And they're like, well, yeah, we have our recurring ad hocs. No, what recurring ad hocs, what they really mean is they're not ad hocs, they're recurring, they just have to be done manually. So what the future is going to look like, we have a lot of efforts going on way outside of ad hoc. Right now we're working on food stamp fraud prediction. We're trying to work on highly avoidable cost prediction models for the highest cost Medicaid members. But why I have all this up here for future architecture, IoT gets a bad rap, and it's not always their fault. They have to play to the largest risk entity in the state, and that's the part-timer coming on in the BMV that's going to go and click on that site, and you know what I mean. They don't really understand the idea of maybe tiered security levels. So what I didn't put on here is, yes, we are backing everything up with Spark. Right now, we have it, you can use Python or you can use R. And oddly, I really thought that for some of the members that I brought on who were really heavy into R, I thought, I can live with this. This will just be the way it is. I don't want to restrict people their tool. They're actually turning over to Python, which I thought was funny. No particular, I ask, and they're just like, I don't know. And I'm like, you're not doing it because I do it, are you? But maybe they are. Do I have that much power? I like it. But yeah, so we would prefer to move a lot more in terms of using AWS EMR. I've got my battles sorted for me right now when it comes to security with IoT, which you should smile every time I say that. So with respect to Spark, so we're going to use PySpark and RSpark. Why Spark? You want to look at all the Medicaid data we have. It's at least 15 years historical that's ready to go, with the remainder all backed up. If we really want to start getting into some more intense elements, we can't do this where we just pull from S3 onto our local and have some fun with it. Luigi, we have too many things that should be running all the time that have so many potentials for fault that I need a fault-tolerant system. If you're not familiar with Luigi, I've implemented it and used it before. It was open sourced by Spotify. It's basically a DAG, right? It's just a task manager. You know, what we don't want to run into is, so if we have a data lake in S3 and we have critical processes running, I don't want to come in the morning or get an email or notification in the night that something went down on the network, therefore everything else has crashed. Luigi handles it in the sense that it knows to wait or to hold off on processes, cache outputs until other things are ready. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. Its convenience factor is pretty phenomenal, and it has pretty slick front end in terms of just turnkey. Hey, you want to look at what's going on in your system, it's ready to go. It's got a dashboard ready. Papermill wraps around Jupyter Notebooks and lets you parameterize them. This is important because some of the folks that I brought on, they're not going to be comfortable writing more traditional data pipelines. They learned on notebooks, and if I let them kind of go loose, I have a feeling that it might get a little hacky in terms of the code. So a Papermill allows them parameterized cells, allows them to pass these off or actually put them into Luigi as tasks and say, you know, let's query data X, and then Luigi will take that as a task and then push it into notebook Y, which is going to run a random forest on whatever. This is how we talk. We just say whatever. The one item that I didn't put on all this, which is relevant with respect to IoT, is that we are doing everything in Docker. And the reason for that is I'm in a world right now where every time I want to install anything on any VM, I have to put in a help desk request. Gets assigned. 5 days later, somebody comes and talks to me about it. And the bottom line we ended up with, which, I mean, it makes sense to go with Docker anyway, but it was essentially, can you just install Docker on everything and allow us, and we'll just handle environment builds on our own. And so far, they seem okay with that. But, you know, in all this, too, the thing I want to bring up, and it just wraps back around to no, I'm not going to work for state government. I think the one thing that's been incredibly rewarding, and I like talking to other people about it right now, is that, I mean, this is some of the most important stuff you're paying for. And when I walk in and I see, wow, what crappy shape, and then I think of something like, remember Yo? Got a $10 million valuation. They were a customer of one of my old companies. So we struggle to predict dangerous medical conditions for people, but it's just as easy to value an application that sends the damn message yo to each other for $10 million. This is an area where I feel a little disenchantment in tech, and it's one of the reasons why I did decide to do this. Whether I'm getting up on a soapbox and saying I'm doing my public service, I don't know. I didn't think that until I got in there and went, I don't know that I thought I was doing my public service. I thought I was doing a favor for a friend. But then I got in there and saw how disorganized it was and went, well, I guess I'm doing public service now. So that's my spiel. That's my kind of stickler for, if you get the opportunity, it's worth it. I had to take a little pay cut, and I can tell you, will I be here forever? Probably not, and that's okay. But I'd rather be able to know that maybe I brought down your W-2 costs just a smidge. So that's all I got. Any questions? Shoot away. Oh my gosh. Did you consider pip env for Python dependencies? No, at this point we are still using just virtual environment, just pure virtual env. Here's a pain. So the virtual machines that I have available to me, why am I not talking about everything on AWS? I have some permissions to use AWS. I have some not. There's no internet connection allowed on any of these. So what we've actually been using more or less, there's a tool called Basket where you can just download basically the main tar file, but all its dependencies. It's a complete pain in the butt. We have to SCP things in over the firewall and then do manual installs. Or what we're really doing now, because we've moved everything to Docker, is we're just creating our Docker images and then have those loaded up. But still, yeah, it's a treat. We will get around that. But yeah, to that question, no, and the reason why no, I never considered it to be a bigger problem. I mean, the problem I just defined is bigger than that. How does the IT at the enterprise level deploy Python tools to the developers' laptops now? What is it Windows uses? Center. That's how they do it now. But wait for it. A person actually comes out to your laptop. They send out a technician who walks up and manually installs it. We're not supposed to, on this, I guarantee you IoT has a dossier on me. And the only reason I'm probably not in deep water is I have the complete cover. I mean, a little nepotism, come on. I'm friends with the secretary, and I have the blessing of the CIO to kind of do what I think's right. Within reason. Every once in a while, the CIO's name's Jared Linder. We just had to have drinks yesterday because every once in a while he has to go have beers with me to tell me about the emails he's gotten about me. In this case, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Esri software. I've mostly worked with spatial data companies. I started a company called Maponics. I am not hard opinionated about most tech, except Esri. Which I really despise. So the big deal the other day was I canceled all of our ArcMap licenses without warning anyone. And so, of course, the Esri rep got in the ear of legislators and other people. So now on Monday, I have to go talk to people about why that was the right decision, which is a pretty easy answer, which is I just saved $250,000 a year, which means if you still want to keep your budgets up and you still want to spend that money, why don't we hire some people? That's my point, too, with open source, is that I'm not against commercial off-the-shelf software. My point with open source, though, is it gives you room and latitude to invest in people who can then continue to contribute to these things. That's usually the argument I give, too, when people say, well, we can't support it if you leave. You can if you give me budget to hire people and train. So, yeah, that's kind of went off there. Why did you choose workflow pull requests versus a develop branch? Has it been worthwhile for the extra overhead? Are you using the PRs for code review? Answer those in order. When it comes to anything that's actually going to be reused software, we're using GitFlow. We're not using GitHub Flow, so we do have a develop branch. We use GitHub Flow in these ad hocs because there might not be any future feature requests. In fact, in most cases, what happens is, I've got an amazing team, including myself of 3 right now, so we're not huge. What usually happens is somebody takes the ad hoc and they'll make a develop branch. I know this sounds cute, but we do that because it's going to be the one-time branch. If there are future branches past that, it seems confusing to an outsider, but from an insider, what do you name a feature branch for a repo that will only ever have one feature? You don't have to name it develop, but it's been worth, there was actually, it's funny, when you say worth the extra overhead, I wouldn't use that model for software because of the extra overhead. I do use it in these ad hocs because honestly, I would say there isn't any extra overhead. And why not? Because it required a little bit less training, and it's easy. It's easier for, I mean, some of my users, you have to keep in mind, are more or less SQL jockeys. They don't know anything else outside of that. So they're not using Git on the command line. They're going to use the GitHub GUI for Windows. This works. It's a simple approach. It makes it easy on them. PRs for code review, absolutely. Even on the ad hocs, you don't, if I see somebody merge their own branch, it's gonna be a bad day. I just said, 2 rules. Don't merge your own PR, and don't merge to master. If you're merging to master because like I changed a sentence in a README, I don't care. But if you're actually changing code and you merge to master, how are analyses organized with version control? A repo for each individual analysis. How do you search find relevant ones again? I like it. Okay, so analyses organized with version control. Version control in this situation is not existing in a vacuum. I prefer more or less systems where we have what, how, and why. So for us, what? Jira. So that's going to define your problem, right? So tickets go in, you might have a story, you might have a project, you might just have a one-off task. That's your what. What are we doing? Version control in this instance is how. And by rule, everyone needs to, if they open up a pull request that is designed to satisfy whatever particular task ticket or whatever that Jira ticket is, you link in and you just basically put a note links to, because if I go in to see what was asked and I see it's closed, I want to be able to immediately go to how it was resolved, which is version control. Finally, the why. In our case, we use Confluence, but you could use anything. And it's such, I know there's a lot of people out there that said code should be self-documenting. I mean, that's all well and good until you get the new person in that went, this isn't self-documenting at all. I don't know what it's doing. And it gets even more complicated when you work, especially with medical claims. So typically for any particular analyses, I want everybody to open up a Confluence page and just explain what you learned, kind of create almost an FAQ. I don't want people to spend a ton of time on it, but just something that if I have questions about it or a new analysis comes up and it's related, so I can just kind of see, what did you learn when you did it? Yes, it is a repo for each individual analysis, which seems big. Hopefully I answered all that. What insights have you gained in relation to the dynamic between state legislature and how it might be affecting the health of Hoosiers, bigger picture nationwide? I'm going to get in so much trouble for saying this. I'm already in trouble. Okay, so on some levels, the problems we run into is that politics and truth don't line up, right? So take non-emergency medical transportation. Rafael Sanchez does a call 6 for help. And they talked to one individual member who the NEMT provider didn't come and pick them up. Without naming this particular NEMT individual, I looked into their call center notes. They didn't take the ride because a Chinese guy was behind the wheel. And interestingly enough, and that was their words to the call center, a Chinese guy who was named Hector Sanchez. So it's hard to go back to the legislature and say, look, we can't make up for the fact that some old folks are racist. Now, one of the issues with the state legislature and the health of Hoosiers that comes up a lot, the nursing home lobby in Indiana is unusually strong. I mean, super strong. And if you look at a lot of the filings for these nursing homes, guess what particular body has at least 12 members with ownership stakes in nursing homes? So far, to be honest with you, they're just there. Like they don't help. They don't help. They don't hurt. They do their own thing, and most of the time, I don't even think about it. I have proposed getting an air horn. Because I get the dumbest questions from the legislature. Well, they're usually grandstanding questions, right, that they can go back to. NEMT, our NEMT broker kind of works like an Uber model. They're out of Atlanta. I had a state legislature member say, well, you should relinquish the contract immediately, which I have no control over, because this would have been better had it been an Indiana company. Well, it's a free market system. Indiana companies were allowed to bid on this. Nobody did. So who do you want me to pick? And one of the reasons, too, by the way, with respect to this question, the legislature, health of Hoosiers, NEMT, why it became a big deal, the nursing home lobby was double dipping. So they would arrange for NEMT trips, but then they would arrange for return trips that should have been part of the same cost. So basically, people got upset about the NEMT stuff because what did we do? We affected people's money. And it's easier to throw somebody like the secretary of the FSSA under the bus and pretend like there's an actual problem when really we affected people's money. Oh, and then bigger picture nationwide. You know what I'm really optimistic about is I'm getting a lot of communication with other states, and I'm trying to perpetuate this, where sometimes CMS, Center for Medicaid and Medicare and Medicaid Services, I mean, they're moving at the whim of whatever administration's in play, but when I work to other technocrats in other states, we're having some good luck talking to like Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, and talking about developing baselines on things that we don't get any feedback from CMS, who's collecting data nationwide, so your expectation would be, well, you give us a national standard. And when we don't, we're trying to reach out to other states and say, hey, what if we just all got together and we develop data sharing agreements, and then we could have some power against some of these lobbies, against some of these contracts and vendors that can outspend us. Let's see, how do you manage data access within Docker? Painfully. No, mostly since Docker runs on the specific VMs, if there's data, so the VMs that we have on-prem can access our data warehouse. So usually I just do a volume mount from the host OS to Docker, unless we can ODBC directly in from a Docker container. Or if it's in S3, I was able to get a whitelist exception, so we can actually hit S3. So at this point, the best answer I could give to that question is volume mounting off the host.
All right, I don't think we have any other questions. I want to thank Aaron. Let's give him a big round of applause for being here with us today.